Mackenzie Johnston here with Tri-State Livestock News discussing fair cattle markets. Today we have Greg Arendt of Valentine Livestock with us to talk about issues within our industry. How are things in Valentine today, Greg?
They're great.
Good.
It's a beautiful day, sun's shining. You know, cow market was up yesterday. You know, in my business, when things go up, and especially prices, then we feel better.
I think we can hear the grass growing with all the sunshine.
Yes, we can.
What do you think are the major issues standing in the way of fair cattle markets today?
There's going to be several things to talk about. Number one is that in our current situation with coronavirus, we have this big disparity with beef cutouts being at $4 a pound and fat cattle being, today they paid $1.15. Last week it was $95. It's been all over the board. There's no price consistency. So, as Bill Bullard, and I'm going to talk maybe about him sometimes today, but he said we live in a dysfunctional cattle pricing situation for us in our fat cattle trade. And I think it does have dysfunction, because when you can sell fat cattle in Cascade, Iowa for $1.05, and there's fat cattle priced, and this is like 5-6 weeks ago, and they came out of Kansas and they'll go to the same plant at $1.12. And the fellow that got $1.05 is only 50 miles from the plant, and the $1.12 came from Kansas, and they called it a basis contract, and he had to, and there's some dysfunction there.
Right.
And so is there fair play in the fat cattle trade? Not really. And how do we fix that? That's a big issue.
Right.
And of course, the one thing that I think that would be that would help U.S. cattlemen, number one, cow-calf producers, backgrounders, and finishers, is country of origin labeling would come back into play. You know, we had it. We knew what it did. We have a feel for it. We have experience with it. It maybe wasn't everybody's cup of tea, especially the packer, but at the same time, it was vital to the existence of our U.S. cattle industry.
Right. So you talked about getting competition back in our cattle markets. There's a lot of talk about increasing negotiated cash trade. There's some different proposals out there. There's a 30-14 proposal with the U.S. cattlemen, and then our calf is also pushing 50%. Do you think there's a certain level we need to go for there, or just essentially we need more? We just need to get something done. What's your thoughts?
I've thought about this a little bit. Okay, so if you have a 30% negotiated cash trade, we were at 30% negotiated cash trade probably 15 years ago to 20 years ago, maybe 25. If you had 8 or 9 packers in the business, if you had 8 or 9 packers in the business with 30% negotiated cash trade, you would probably have a competitive situation. With only 3 or 4 packers, because there's dynamics on both sides here. See, if you only have 2 or 3 players, a 30% cash trade might not be enough. Besides that, there is no level of certainty that you're going to have 30% one day. You might only have 85 or 15%. See, because it's going to fluctuate. It's not never going to be exactly the same. Nobody's ever going to be able to draw that line in the sand. And so something that says maybe more 50% is easier to measure.
Right.
But it's probably harder to obtain, whereas a 30% competitive situation of packer to packer bidding process would be easier to maybe get to. And so it might not be 30, it might not be 50, but they're both the right direction.
Right.
We're in the right direction. I'm not sure where we're going to land, but I think that we're going to be, long as we have common goals and we get along and we sit at the table to get this done. If we would fight amongst ourselves, the people that propose these situations to solutions, don't come to some compromise, doesn't matter what happens in the end, because the packer wins.
Right.
And we don't need to be adversarial to the packer. We just need him to be compromising. And so that, the world's full of compromise.
Yeah, it sure
Right.
is.
I mean,
These tough times that we're facing in the cattle industry with less than ideal cattle markets, how do you see that affecting this area?
well, I don't want to really say it, but I don't want the little people to go away.
Yeah.
I want the 250 to 350 cow herds to stay intact because number one, they would raise about 125 or 50 steers or 200 steers, and those would have load lots and potential. And those are the kind of people that I think are essentially to our fabric, our community. They would occupy, 3,000 or 4,000 acre places in this region. They become essential to the community. There's enough of people involved in those families, those schools, all those. That's all part of that cohesive energy that goes into having a good community and something that's easily to work within. If you had larger places and more less people, pretty soon there's not as many people out there, and there's not this energy or this community of energy that goes with that. You lose that.
Right. Last week I had the opportunity to talk to John Campbell of Winter Livestock down in La Junta, Colorado, and he made the comment that we've been seeing packer consolidation for years. We've just slowly been seeing it coming on. Why do you think as an industry we've sat back and let it get this out of hand?
Good question. Partly because of the fact that we have that economies of scale get into place, and so those economies of scale. So let's just say you're feeding 5,000 head of cattle, and let's say you get by with part-time help,
okay,
and you decide to grow because you can feed more cattle, you got more feed, and you got more pivots or something, and so you have this excess feed. And besides, if you hire one more person full-time, you have more time to delegate. So you look at the whole picture. And what's happened and I think in this business of fed cattle business is packer size, plant size got big. Instead of being 1,500 a day or 2,000 or 4,000. And those consolidations, they want to deal with one big feed yard. They want to deal with maybe less feed yards. They want to deal with just less numbers, and so they want to deal with the larger units. Economies of scale are part of that, and so there's a cost advantage in that, and those are some of the things that become advantageous to the economy. Part of the reason why we should have a Department of Justice involved is because in the United States, everybody has an equal opportunity. It's supposed to make a living and get in business, and you need to be able to buy a piece of land, hopefully, and put some cows on it if that's what you want to do, or you want to buy a piece of land and raise avocados, you should be able to. And so in this whole dynamic of our ebb and flow of capitalism, and you want to put your best foot forward and be smart and figure out how to be in business for yourself. And some of that's gone the way of bigger is better, and if you don't have the capital and it's hard to get capital, you're not going to get in that business. And so consequently, larger is bigger. That's just and it's been okay. It's been okay by the Department of Justice. Industries like cement and other industries, steel. There used to be the atmosphere. They broke up Ma Bell and made all these telephone companies, but that was probably the last big one. Otherwise, the United States, basically, the people look out across the horizon that are in a political arena, say, well, this big is not bad. Well, let's just keep doing it. Let's just let them keep doing it. And consequently, that's why packers got bigger. Nobody, instead of saying national beef cannot be bought by the Brazilians. So in order to have a competitive atmosphere, Tamapac that was bought by National Beef was bought by the Brazilian company Martha or whatever. Uh, the United States Department of Justice should have stepped in. See, that's where, all right, if we're going to have a level playing field and have competitive spirit, we should have not allowed all these. Before it was ConAgra, it was Swift. When it was ConAgra, then it became whoever it was.
Yeah.
Right. But Cargill became bigger.
Mm-hmm.
JBS became a company, and they own hogs, they own cattle. They become huge in their empires, and instead of having more packers, they have allowed these to grow and prosper without maybe articulating that we need to have less packers or more packers and less players, the centralized players,
right.
Because that's where we landed. This is why the reason why we're having these conversations right now is because we don't have very many players at the end product.
Right.
I mean, and there's no reason why we couldn't have 5 or 6 packers, but it does take a ton of capital, and in some respects they were there at one time. It's just whether or not the Department of Justice allowed them, or the other regulatory agency allowed them to be bought up by another entity, the same entity.
Do you know very many feeders or any feeders at all that have cattle that are ready to go to slaughter but can't get a bid on them? There's
2 things that happen there. Okay, number one, they can't get a bid they like.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think they're getting bid 95 and somebody else is getting $1.10, Mackenzie. So what happens? They don't want to take it.
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
Right. So their cattle are still on feed. Right. And number 2 is that the packer won't bid on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So a refusal of packer, and it's part of the waiting game. The packer knows that he's got control.
Yeah.
Because number 1, we got coronavirus in Grand Island. So the Tyson plant in Lexington knows that there's not going to be, there's plenty of cattle around. They can get more than they need.
Right.
So consequently, they don't bid on it.
Right.
All right. So now it becomes a logjam. Right. And so consequently, this guy might feed these cattle for 2, 3, 4 weeks. All right. And now they're going to get too big. So you've either got to be proactive in your, and I thought this, okay, if you feed cattle every day and you're dumping 20 pounds of corn to them and they're already finished, maybe you better back off the feed wagon just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't know when your time's coming, if you can get them marketed in the proper fashion. But there is, it's frustrating for those guys that have these cattle ready that can't get a competitive bid.
Yeah.
And their independence. And then the guys that have the cattle already more or less marketed or take the week average, they're getting their cattle taken care of. They're just not very happy about their price.
Right.
And this is where that basis comes in when the market was going down, and the guy gets $1.05 in Iowa, and the guy in Kansas gets $1.12. There's something wrong with that picture.
Mm-hmm.
He knows it, and he's frustrated, and he would. That's just part of this is what's going on in our business, is that we have way too much disparity in our overall business of fed cattle. The price disparity, marketing disparity.
Yeah.
It's hard to get a handle on this.
Yeah.
And that's why all of a sudden you become front and center. It becomes paramount to find out what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And what we can do is get ourselves together and get on the same playing field.
Right.
We visited about this earlier. If we can get all these cattle organizations to at least agree that there's a problem, that it's central to our enterprise, and would sit at the same table and actually invite everybody to come on board and get some resolution and stand up and not get too prejudiced about who's what and what's where.
Yep.
So that we can actually get something done. I think this is a prime opportunity because we're at critical mass.
Oh yeah.
We can't be selling 950 pound steers. for $1,100.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
No.
And it doesn't work to sell $800 calves this fall either. $800 steer calves, and that's where we're headed if we don't get something done. And that helps the price mechanism in our business.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that we need to basically get all the cattle organizations on the same page. Do you think that's possible? Do you think we can have NCBA, RCAF, U.S. Cattlemen's, all those folks? Do you think we will be able to sit down and agree and come to some consensus, in your opinion?
If they feel the need, if their membership would tell them that they need to, I think there's critical mass at this. I think it's time.
Yep.
And I think there's enough people out there saying you need to listen. You need to pay attention and get this done. This needs to happen. And I think that's happened. I think there's enough vocal awareness that there's enough people out there that want mandatory cool. They want competitive markets. And how we arrive at that, we have different thought processes, but if that same thought has got just different facts to it, or maybe resolutions, at least we're going the same direction. We might not end up there, but we can at least have some compromise.
Yeah.
And hopefully get there. It's the 50% competitive market versus the 30% competitive market. Is there 30%? Is 30% enough to create a competitive market? It depends how long you've been around.
Yeah.
If you're a 70-year-old cattle feeder, you might say 50% is better. If you're only been in the business for 25 years, you'll say, well, geez, 30% would be great.
Yeah.
See, it's a difference of age maybe too, and experience.
Right. So if you could sum up everything into one sentence, what does the cattle industry need most today?
We need everybody that has a cow-calf, that has a background in the yard, stand up and say something. And get just one time, be vocal. If you didn't call your congressman, if you didn't call Sonny Perdue, if you did not write your letter, do that. Just do it one time, twice. Get it done. Call them. Because if you don't, you're leaving yourself way open to whatever happens, and you did not help yourself.
Yeah. Do you have any other closing statements you want to make before we're done? Anything else you want to throw out there?
Well, I first heard about it today, about the Department of Justice. And actually, if I go recollect my thoughts about this, I've had these thoughts about the Department of Justice. Over the years, the fact that we deal with different government entities in our livestock auction business, we have crossed that path of the Department of Justice. And whether or not it's funded, whether or not they have enough people to staff and enforce the laws. And the DOJ maybe should be mandated to have an investigation of packer monopoly. And if it comes from the right source, maybe it would have more impact. And so if the president says this, then maybe it would have impact. Maybe it would have the right people get behind it and say, okay, this is what's going on in this industry. These are some of the facts that we lined out. This is what we can conceive to be to the truth. And I think there's people that are more knowledgeable than me that have the ability to recite what's happened in our industry. Our calf, Bill Bullard, I think, is one of those people. A large source of information that's accurate, good data, and very much tuned into where our industry's headed and been shrinking. The cow calf industry shrinking.
Yeah.
And there should, not that it maybe shouldn't be a little bit realigned, but at the same time, why can't we have more competitive atmosphere when it comes to selling our livestock auctions create a pretty competitive atmosphere. And the fact that there's 5 or 6 of them in an area where they worry about what the other one does, makes them more aware. You have to be more acute to your what you do. You want to present, do the best that you can to make a sale day a great event. That has to, those sale day has a mindset of its own, and if you treat it, everybody has a importance in that who's ever on that sale, and so you create this atmosphere, and there's no reason why we couldn't create that same atmosphere. And we used to do that when 6 packer buyers would drive into your yard, and they would bid on your cattle, or you would say, these cattle are for sale, or would you want to look at these or those. When you have that, then you can create an atmosphere, and that atmosphere has been missing. It's just, and that's not what some of the table setters, some of the packers want. They do not want competitive bidding. They do not want to go out to the country and bid on any cattle. They want you to say, okay, these 1,000 head in this pen, or these 10,000 in this feed yard, are going to XYZ. And it doesn't matter if the other companies come in there. They might take inventory, but they don't bid. And that creates a less of an involvement. When that involvement's not there, we are not getting the competition that we need to have to create price. Price is what we're after. And the only way we get price is to have people be involved. And we don't have that. We don't have that competitive spirit.
There's very little price discovery.
So what do we do? What do we have to do? Just have to be involved. We have to be. I think we have to share a certain amount of understanding and kindness to our fellow man, but at the same time hold our ground.
There's a fine line to walk.
Yes, we got to hold our ground. But we can't get pushed around. I applaud those people that are carrying the torch. Those people that work 24/7, that really speak toward the goodwill of our industry. Need someone to stand up and say, Americans count. All right, our production counts. And whether you're raising, if you're a food provider, you count. I don't care whether you're raising grapes, tomatoes, potatoes, you count. You need to count. The American production should count more toward America and have that more value. There should be that element should be really pronounced, and it should be really taken to Washington. NAFTA is a great thing, and Canadians should count too, but we should protect our own industry to a certain extent. We need to protect our own industries. If we don't protect our industries, who's going to protect them? And then what are we going to do when we have coronavirus type situations where we don't have enough food in the United States because we import it all? And those situations then become really critical mass to whether or not we protected our borders. It's not war that's going to put us in jeopardy. It's going to be food shortages or somebody's disease, which this thing is, this coronavirus. We don't need foot and mouth in the United States.
Clearly. And
so we need to be protective of that industries, in those industries, and food should be number one on that protection item. It doesn't matter what kind of food it is, but it should be tantamount that we have politicians understand that we should protect our food industry.
With that, Greg, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to us today. And stay tuned. We'll have more interviews on the way.